In today's demo, we're going to begin mixing the color wheel. We're going to be working with gouache paints, which are kind of a mix between acrylic and watercolor paints. They have properties of both of those. We're going to be mixing the most high intensity colors that we can, which is going to be with our cyan, our magenta, and then also our yellow. When I do talk about tints and shades, we'll work with our black and white to mix those. So one of the things to keep in mind is that the way that gouache functions is that it's a very kind of matte, high intensity color. When we're mixing our colors, it's really important that you do them in a certain order. So you need to follow the steps that I'm saying in this video for mixing your color chart that you're going to be working with. So the first color that we're going to work with is our yellow, which is going to be our most luminous color. The easiest colors to mix are going to be from our yellow to our magenta, and then also our yellow to our cyan. The most difficult colors to mix are going to be from our cyan to our magenta, or our purples are going to be a bit of a challenge. Right now we're going to start with working from our yellow to our magenta, working with our orange, our red orange, and also our yellow orange. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to make my first swatch. Make your swatches large enough where you can make sure that you trim them out. And then you also want to make sure that as you are making your swatch, that swatch is not textured. That's a really nice flat, even swatch, and that's large enough, like I said, that you can go ahead and cut it out easily. So this is our yellow one. That's our first one. That one's pretty easy. And then what we're going to do is we're going to work with our cyan and we're going to add it into the yellow. We always add a darker color into a lighter color. We never add a lighter color into a darker color. You would use up all of your paints doing that. I'm going to add the tiniest amount of magenta because it's so saturated, it's going to affect the color so much. So I'm going to add just the tiniest, tiniest, tiniest amount. And you can see how small that is. And I might even make it a little bit less. And then I'm going to work that into my yellow. And you'll notice immediately we have a color change. You want to take your steps very, very slowly. And that's why we're doing a lot of swatches and a lot of steps. And then we're going to pick the best between the two. So right now, the color that I'm attempting to mix is my yellow orange. And you'll notice that there already is a changing color as I'm working with it right now. So I'm going to go ahead. In most colors, you're going to be able to see those changes by comparing them to one another, and you can already see there's a change in saturation. The color I'm mixing is less saturated because I'm adding another color to it. And you'll also be able to see kind of those red undertones. So this one I'm thinking about for my yellow orange. And you can see that there's definitely, these are two different colors at this point. I'm going to progressively add more magenta. So I'm going to add some more magenta. And then once you have your full range mix, that's when you can kind of go back in and decide, is that my yellow orange? Is that a good orange, plain orange? How is that looking? So, all right, and now I'm gonna go, and this is still in that yellow orange range. You'll notice that this one is changing in regards to the magenta. And if you're working with your color, you want to make sure that's nice and even, that you're kind of getting any streaks out. That's a really nice flat color, that you don't have any texture to it. So if you're seeing the paper through it, one thing that you can do is you can add another layer to it. Gouache dries very quickly. So you have a really nice solid color. You shouldn't be able to see the paper underneath of it, and you also shouldn't see any streaks. It should look like a really nice flat color. All right, so now I want to work towards my orange. I've given myself, and it might be that you want to give yourself some more choices for that yellow orange, which is totally fine. The one thing that I do want to be thinking about is kind of making sure that these colors are as neutral as possible. So the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more of that magenta so that I can hop forward a little bit faster. You want to make sure that you don't overshoot your color though. If you overshoot your color, it's going to be really hard because you're going to have to go backwards to kind of get back to it. So right now the color that I'm trying to get to is my neutral orange. So we'll go ahead and we'll swatch that. And that still has a little bit too much yellow in it, so I'm going to keep adding magenta. So as I add one color to another color, I'm just going to go ahead and swatch it so that I can grab it later on. So let's see if I've gone too far at this point. Hopefully not. And that is a pretty good orange. I am really, really pretty happy with that. So the next thing I want to work towards, I might be picking between those two. The next thing that I want to work towards, and I'll add some more yellow. And you can go ahead and just add your yellow to this area that you've been working with because we're going to go past it. We're going to go on to magenta. So it's okay if we kind of mix these colors in. So my next color that I'm going to want to work towards is my red orange. So heading closer to magenta. And making sure that you have a noticeable difference. So I think the most common mistake I see students make is that, say, their red orange looks too similar to their actual orange. And so you need to make sure that the two look like they're two distinct colors. So I'm going to go ahead and swatch this. We're kind of getting a good mustard and ketchup color right here. And I'll swatch it. And I think I want to keep adding some magenta to it. The reason that we do this and the reason that we're practicing this is so that we can really see those subtle shifts in color and so that we can make decisions based on those subtle shifts. You know, what kind of color do we want to work with in our work, and how do we mix those colors? You know, what you might think is an orange is actually, you know, a red orange that you're working with. This is getting much better. So I'm going to grab just a tiny bit more and see if I can make it a little bit more extreme. And of course, if you look at it and you feel like that just looks like one tiny step away from magenta, you want to kind of go back to the one before it. So nice red orange right here. That is looking really, really, really pretty good. So the next color that I want to swatch is the magenta. And the magenta is one of those colors that, much like the cyan, you might need to do a couple of coats of. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to swatch it. And you can see just by comparing these colors, maybe I might have wanted to add a little bit more to my red orange. And then deciding here where I think my yellow orange should occur. So this is my range from my yellows to my magentas. And then the next step that I'm going to do is my range from my yellow to my blue. Remember, we're going to do our purples last. That's going to be the very last thing that we're doing. So right now, I'm going to add some more yellow. And once again, we're going to mix our darker color into our lighter color. You don't need to swatch the yellow again because we've already got that yellow swatch. So your primary colors, you only really need to swatch them. The same thing with your magenta. You need to make sure that you just use a tiny, tiny little amount of it because it's really going to dramatically and quickly change that color. And the first color that I'm going to mix in this sequence is going to be my yellow green. And getting the middle green is really quite tricky. I think that's one of the most challenging colors to mix because it's very easy to kind of go towards the yellow spectrum a little bit too much or the blue spectrum too much. All right, so it looks like I need to push this a little bit farther so that it reads as green. And as you're mixing, you just want to be kind of conscious of that you're thoroughly mixing the color, that you don't have any streaks in it. That's a nice, solid, flat color. And if you need to kind of do a couple layers of it, you're welcome to do that too. Cyan is going to be the most problematic in that regard. This is a really nice yellow-green. And then you can just keep working towards your green. Like I said, the green is very easy to kind of overshoot and make it too blue. So it's good to kind of go really, really slow with this so that you're not kind of missing that kind of midway point between the two. And you can still see that this has a lot of yellow in it. And as you get more comfortable with kind of mixing your paints and kind of getting your colors where you want them to be, you can make bigger jumps as long as you feel like you're not going to kind of jump over the one that we need to work with. So we're getting really close to that green. The greens, I find typically you have to mix more steps in. You know, the yellow to the magenta is a little bit easier to work with. But once you hit that middle green, then you can kind of make a bigger jump towards the blue-green at that point. So, and here you can see a big difference between the amount of yellow and the amount of blue between this swatch and the swatch that came before it. So now I'm pretty happy with that kind of middle green. I might add just a tiny bit more to see if I can get close to that kind of really neutral green that feels like a true green without having too much of one color in it. And we'll do this as our last option for that. Now I want to go ahead and add quite a bit of the cyan because I'm going to jump over to blue-green, and that should be a pretty strong, obvious color at that point. And you might give yourself some options for this. Let's see, this still has a lot of that yellow in it, so I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive with the amount of cyan that I put in. And the thing to keep in mind is that this project is not so much about painting. This project is about color mixing and being able to mix your colors. So here you can see I'm getting much closer to my blue-green, but I want it to be really obvious, so I'm going to add quite a bit more of the cyan into that green that I've already mixed. So you're kind of taking each steps, kind of going around so that you're utilizing your paint in the best way possible. And so this is actually looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'll give myself one more option. So you should have a pretty extreme yellow green, a really good neutral green somewhere in here, and then a really nice blue green. And you should be able to kind of discern the differences between the two. So I'm pretty happy with that. I might push it a little bit farther. A lot of times I need to kind of swatch and see what the cyan is going to look like. That can be another thing that'll give you an indication of kind of like where your color is. I'm going to be nitpicky and mix one more swatch just to see how it looks. And it might be that that's my true blue-green right there, which that's actually, I think, pretty close to what I want. The greens and the purples will definitely be much more obvious in kind of their mixing and kind of how solid they are on the paper that you're working with. The lighter values, you'll notice that they'll dry a little bit darker, a little bit lighter, so you'll need to think about kind of how the streaks are kind of looking. And then now I'm going to go ahead and swatch my cyan. And so here, seeing my cyan, I might have actually pushed that a little bit farther in terms of the cyan range. So the next set of colors that I'm going to mix is going to be from my cyan to my magenta. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky because the darker colors are much harder to kind of see their values. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, because my magenta has a little bit of orange in it. So thinking about my magenta, the next color that I want to mix next to my magenta is going to be my red purple. So I'm going to add a little bit of cyan. I actually have enough cyan on my brush. I'm going to kind of see what this does. I think this should be enough to see a difference. Yep. So your purples are really tricky. Hitting that middle purple is definitely a challenge. I think this will get me pretty close to what I want from my red purple though. And if you feel like you missed that step, just go back. So you can mix a smaller amount if you want to. So here I'm going to kind of go this way. So this is my red purple range that I'm going to be working with. This is one of the most streaky ranges in regards to you're working with your cyan and your magenta, which both their coverage is not quite as good. So these you might want to do a couple of layers for each one of the swatches that you're going to do. So Once again, I'm going to continue. These you'll notice you'll probably have to add larger amounts because they're both darker value colors. So it's going to take a little bit more to kind of push it. And then with the purples, there is such a fine line between red purple and red blue, or red purple, blue purple, and kind of hitting that really nice, even neutral purple. So here I can see this still has a lot of the magenta in it. So I'm going to keep adding my blue. And then at a certain point, actually, because these values become so similar, you could take this purple and add it into the cyan, depending on kind of how much of your paint you've gone through and kind of how you want to think about it. So I'm getting pretty close to that neutral purple. You can really see when the purples start to happen, especially when you're working with our color schemes, is when you add some white to it. So some white will really show you where those biases is. So if you are really curious, you can add a little bit if you wanted to, but it's certainly not required. So you can see now I'm trending towards my blue range of colors. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add this color that I've mixed into the cyan, because now I'm really wanting to get back over to my cyan range of colors, my blue range of colors, and not so much in the magenta range. Oh, there's Yoshi. He's saying hello. All right, so this should get me into a really nice range of my blue purples, and ooh, I'm pretty happy with that. And the same thing, now I'm going to kind of add another little bit of cyan right here, and I'm just going to kind of keep adding that color into it, or I could do it vice versa. So, but this should really give me my nice blue purple that I'm trying to get to, and I'm really pretty happy with that right there. And then of course this swatch would then lead around to the cyan, and you can see the cyan drying right there. So once, and some students, you know, don't be afraid that you might end up with a lot of extra swatches or extra steps. That's totally fine. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to have you guys cut these all apart, kind of keep them together in the same space, and then pick out which one you think is your best. So this would be your yellow. Right in here would be your yellow oranges, your oranges, and then you would glue them down onto another piece of Bristol paper and show that really nice range of your hues changing throughout the spectrum. So